So this is project management with Drupal, get comfortable with change. What I want to go over today is a base process that I use to start with on all projects, and then how that process can change depending on the needs of projects, how you can work to get on the client's good side, to have them be on board with you wanting to make changes to that process, and then some things that I do to help keep the team, more specifically developers, happy throughout my projects. So I am Jessica Mokrzecki. I am a technical project manager at Lullabot. We are a design, development, and strategy company. It's a distributed company, so we kind of work all over the world. But myself and Ellie right here are actually in Austin. All right. So when I first joined Lullabot, I did kind of what you would do when you're typically joining a new company. I asked all of my other project managers to kind of walk me through the process that they use on projects. And every single one of them kind of went, we don't really have a process. Every project is different. And so for me, trying to onboard, that was frustrating for me because I want to do as good as I can here, but I wasn't getting the answers that I needed. The background that I had came from using different CMSs, Joomla, WordPress, and an e-commerce software. And so more specifically that e-commerce software, we had two different types of clients, a small business and enterprise, and so I had two different processes. Every single project was the exact same on those processes. Didn't matter what they were selling or the scope of the project, it was always the same process. So that's where I came from and where I was used to kind of saying, tell me your process so I can do things the Lullabot way. So now that I've been at Lullabot for about 3 years, I'm kind of on the same wavelength as them. If you came and asked me now, tell me about the process that you use for all Lullabot projects, I would say there isn't one. They're all different. And so what I have found, though, what I try to help with other people is there's a base process that you can use. There's this process that I start with to help start that conversation with the client. I want to say, here's how a flow of a project can work, but let's talk about your specific project, the variables, and the scope of this so that we can kind of start tweaking that process so that things will work smoothly as they can. Having said that, there are still some basics that Lullabot does. Most of our projects are Agile and Scrum, and so we have our daily or every other day stand-ups, and that's something as a project manager that's very valuable for me because I am a huge believer in note-taking, especially on those stand-ups. The more notes I take, the more I can have the developers off on their own, and I can answer all the questions during various meetings versus just kind of listening and saying, okay. It also helps when developers aren't able to make those stand-ups and they want to come back and see where everyone is at. They can refer to my notes as well. And then we do about the typical 2 to 4 week iterations depending on the size of the project and also the release schedule. So if we're launching at the end of each sprint directly to a live site, we might have a longer iteration because you want to allow more time for testing, where if we're just building something and we aren't going to launch until a few months down the road, I might do a much smaller iteration just so I can see results quicker. And then we have our typical sprint planning, so we're working with our client, looking through our backlog, looking at our roadmap, and pulling things in to plan out the next, at least sprint, sometimes 2, depends on the project again. At the end of each sprint, we're going to do a demo, and that's going to be run either by myself or a tech lead, and we're going to use all of the tickets that we've completed within that iteration and kind of create a script. I review it with the tech lead to make sure we're all on the same page, nothing was left out, and we have the good visual for the clients. They know what we've been working on. And then lastly is retrospectives. And so these can be done either at the end of each sprint or at the end of the project, but it's something that I highly recommend doing. And I'll get a little more into that here in a second because I find them so valuable. But here's the basics that everybody at Lullabot is using. So now let's talk about this base process. So here's the one that I kind of start with, and if you're familiar with development, it's going to look pretty straightforward to you. At the beginning, I have a status called new, and every ticket that I create is going to go into that new status by default. And this is going to be a ticket that might just have a title. It could have a title and some detail, but it's going to stay in the status until it's ready for a developer to pick up. So my next status is ready for dev. I won't place anything in there unless I know that a developer can grab that ticket at any time. It's worth noting that the ready for dev status doesn't mean that it's in a sprint. It might not be, but I know that any ticket that I'm putting in that status is going to be ready, has all the info, has all the assets, and I can use it at any time. And then as we move through, I forgot my cool little effect, sorry, we're focusing on the beginning. And as we move through, in progress is self-explanatory. The developer is going to grab that ticket and put it in progress. After that becomes a really important status for Lullabot specifically, which is peer review. We are very concerned about the code quality, and we have at least one, if not two, developers review every pull request that we're submitting. It's a good opportunity for developers to learn if they might not know the approach that was taken, or a senior developer could review it and say, why didn't you change your approach a little bit? But every single process that we have is always going to have that review status. And from there, it depends. If it passed review, great, it's going to go to QA. If it didn't, we'll kick it back to in progress. But if it did pass and we're going to QA, we have our ready for QA status. And what I like to do here is to leave the ticket assigned to the original developer. And I do that because it's easier to see who I can go to for questions during QA if something doesn't pass, versus having to dig into every ticket and kind of look at the history. So it's almost, I'm being lazy, but I'm trying to do it for speed. So sit to the original developer who it's assigned to and ready for QA. And same thing, if it fails, there's two options here. One, we're either going to create a follow-up bug ticket for something that might be minor that failed on that ticket, or if everything failed, all of my acceptance criteria did not pass, I'm going to kick it back to in progress and have notes on the ticket of what happened here. And then as we go through, ready to merge. So all of the tickets in my iteration, once they pass QA, are going to get put into this ready to merge status. And at the end of my sprint, when I'm getting ready to do all of my user acceptance testing, I'm going to gather all of those tickets, and my release manager is then going to push it through, cut a release, and merge to my UAT server. So we go from ready to merged, and UAT really quickly. But it's still good to have that so everyone knows what's going on. And then from UAT, once everything looks good to go and we go ahead and push it to production, I'm going to mark it as resolved. And you'll notice there's an extra step, because what we like to do here is to have our stakeholder do one final look on production to make sure it looked just as good as it did on UAT, on production. If it does, gives thumbs up, it's closed. Okay, so that was my base base process that we use. And so you kind of want to think about how has it changed. So let's look at it again. And this process changes depending on the needs of the client. So when you're first talking to a client and you're going through, here's how we create tickets, or here's how we're envisioning the business process around creating tickets, is where you're first going to change this. Mostly you're going to change it where they need visibility. Where do they need to see when tickets are getting stuck, or do they want to know why a ticket is sitting so long? And an example of that here is going to be this process, which I used on it was a customer forum site. So it was a customer who had a wide range of products that they sold, and then they had a forum website for support where customers were supporting each other. And so you'll notice at the beginning of this process is where most of that change happened. So instead of having just a new status, I now have 3 different statuses for when a ticket is created. I have new, current, and future. New is the same as it was before, which is every single ticket that gets created gets stuck in that new category. Now for our current, this is going to be when I know that this ticket is coming up in my roadmap, I'm going to want to work on it soon, I'm going to put it into the current category, because we've got these weekly meetings and I have this huge backlog of tickets. I want to know anything in current is what we should be discussing. I don't want to have to comb through all of the backlog to look at tickets that I don't care about right now. And then the other one is future, and those are for the ones that kind of self-explanatory. I'm not working on right now, I don't really care about right now, but I don't want to forget about them. So we've created the status future to kind of hold those. And then it moves along in the same process where as soon as it has all the information for the developer, it goes to ready for dev. Now the other change you're going to see here became about because of we had tickets that were sitting in progress for too long. And so what we wanted to do was, again, to provide clarity to the client of why they were sitting in there. This specific project, as many projects have, had a stakeholder who was so busy, couldn't really get a hold of them. And it was a person that was, ping me when you need me, email me when you need me, and they're not responding. But we needed feedback from this person in order to move the ticket. These tickets would get a first pass, but they needed to know, is this what you meant? We think this is what you meant, but take a look. And so tickets were sitting in progress, and the business side was getting frustrated that these tickets weren't moving, thinking that it was the developer that was taking too long to actually push their work forward. So by creating the first proof status, I was able to have the business clearly see tickets that needed something. So it was that person who's so busy, but they might have a second to take a look at my sprint board to see, oh, okay, here's my column, my first proof column. Let me take a look at these tickets. And then it was also helping all of the other people in the organization put pressure on that person instead of us, or help that person in saying, let me take a look at these tickets. Can I provide the feedback that you need? And so that was a change that came out because of a bottleneck that we had. That was the word I was trying to find, but I couldn't find earlier. Bottleneck. All right, next process here. This one is a process that we used on a media website, and this one's just kind of a website that we're upkeeping. So at the beginning, you'll see it's changed again, and this process changed because we wanted to keep the terminology the same as the customer was used to. So instead of having a new status, I have product undefined. Same purpose, it's just the ticket's not ready yet. And then instead of ready for dev, I now have a to-do status. The reason we did this was because they had another process for tasks and spikes that was much simpler: to do, doing, done. So by keeping that first ready for dev status the same on all the processes, it just helped everybody understand quickly where a ticket was. And as we move through, we go down to in progress, which you're familiar with. But from here, we've added another status, which I think is fairly common, which is the block status. You have tickets for various reasons that are going to get blocked. But on this specific project, because it's upkeeping, we had a lot of them that got blocked. And it's, again, creating that visibility of developers not just sitting on this ticket taking too long. It's blocked. It needs something. So we had that status created there. Going down again, reviewing the pull requests, down into merged. Now this specific client, the QA team that we used was internal. So typically we're using an offshore QA, but because it was internal, they wanted more visibility into that QA process to know when their team was actually working on things. So not only do I have a ready for QA status, I have QA in progress. I do want to note here again, I'm keeping that ticket assigned to the original developer. It's just something that I really like and I really believe in. So even though I have extra statuses, it's staying assigned to the developer who pulled it into in progress. So from QA in progress, I've got the same thing. If a ticket does not pass, I'm going to stick it into QA blocked. And from there, depending on the severity of the reason it didn't pass, it's either going to get a follow-up bug ticket attached to it, and it'll sit in QA blocked until that ticket, that bug ticket matches up with it, or it'll get pushed all the way back to in progress if it just completely fails. And then from there we go to UAT, and then this one only has the closed status because they, at the end of every sprint, take any ticket that's in that closed status that has the fixed version for that sprint, and then they push it live. And the last one I wanted to show you, so this is a very simplified process, and it's one that we're using outside of Jira. So that's why we had to get a little creative, because some people love Jira, some people hate Jira. Jira has got a ton of things in it, but it can be really useful. But in this instance, I'm using HuBoard with GitHub. I don't have a backlog that I really look at. So I've got a status now that I've used for my backlog. So when I'm looking at HuBoard, I've got all my columns, and now my first column is my backlog column. So that's why it's kind of not traditional to have that status. And then from there, I also have another status for my epics, because I want to identify them but I know that those epics are not moving through the rest of the process. Those are just my larger tickets that are holding all of the information for the stories and tasks that go along with it.
What's your definition of an epic?
An epic is an overarching story, and it's too big to go through an iteration. So you're going to have your epic, and then through that you have your user stories, which will break it down into actionable tasks. So it's huge, typically.
What was the product you mentioned?
HuBoard.
HuBoard?
Yeah, or it could be Hubbard. It's like one of those.
Is that something that hooks up to GitHub issues?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been really useful. We really like it, but it's got its drawbacks, and that I don't have this wonderful backlog like Jira gives you, but it has filters, and it's really nice. And then so from there, I go down to Ready for Dev, same thing. But what you'll see here is I have a block status available at the Ready for Dev level instead of just the working level. And that's because a lot of these tickets, it's just all about dependencies. They had something that it couldn't go through. And so even though I had everything ready that the developer could grab it, technically, they couldn't because it was dependent on another issue moving through the process first. And so as we're going down, you're going to recognize working, review again for that peer review. And then we move into approved, and that's where we're doing the stakeholder approval. Everything looks good to go. It then gets put into the next status, deployed or closed. On this process, we were using Kanban, really. And every ticket, once it was hit to approved, it went ahead and got self-deployed, auto-deployed. Love that feature. Tickets are done, it gets deployed, you're happy. So that's why that one's a little bit different and a lot shorter than the other ones that we did. Okay. So, you've started a project, you've kind of discussed things with the client, and here's how I want to do things. But then what happens when you're identifying bottlenecks and you want to change things? If it's a new project, you might get pushback. And so you've got to build up that trust with the client. And the biggest way I know how to do that is to communicate with the client. Keep that level of communication high and keep that channel open. You can do that through Scrum of Scrums with the client and your weekly status emails. Just let them know what's going good, what did we complete this week, what's at risk for not completing. Letting them know of those risks as soon as you can lets them know that you're not hiding anything from them and lets them be more trustworthy of you. So it's just all about making sure that they know what you know as much as you can. And then the other thing that I'm bringing up again here is the retrospectives. When you're first starting a project, I highly suggest doing retrospectives at the end of each sprint because you've just started that process. You don't really know if it is going to work. You're hoping it is, you think it will, but the retrospectives at the beginning are just crucial to knowing if it is working for your stakeholder, if it's working for your team, or even yourself. So just having those at least every sprint at the beginning of the project, and then as you're kind of settling into your process, you can kind of wait and maybe do one at the end of the project. And I wanted to talk about retrospectives a little more because I feel like everybody kind of has this negative feeling towards retrospectives because typically it's all about what went wrong. Nobody wants to sit in a room and just talk about how you sucked. So what I like to do on a retrospective is come with a plan and share that plan with the team so everyone can be more comfortable with it. So the last one I did, I said, okay, we're going to talk about project management, design, and development. And I actually split the design and development talks out because I wanted to time box it. I didn't want it to have this whole day session. And then what I asked them to do was to think about what went right on the project and what were your pain points. And the reason I want to know what went right is because more often than not, you forget about that when you're thinking about all the things that went wrong and that you just had so much trouble. But there's still so many things that went right, and you want to celebrate the successes that you had. That's going to help you keep that conversation positive and everybody feeling comfortable, and they're more willing to share when they're feeling good about things. So, again, celebrate the successes and then move constructively into pain points with them and talk about, okay, on my last perspective, I was so proud of my team because they did talk about what was right, and then we moved into what was wrong, and nobody really felt down about it. And it was just such a good feeling to be able to talk about here's what didn't work, and maybe here's what we can try a little bit differently. And it was just one of those things where you're like, this was good. I hope everybody came out of there going, retrospectives aren't scary. Now, when you have a retrospective with the client, as a project manager, you're that voice of the team. So I like to meet with my team first and talk about, again, the successes and the pain points. And then specifically the pain points, let's talk about what we think could make that better. And so by coming to the client with my pain points and possible solutions, they're not going to be sitting here going, okay, great, you're coming to me with a problem, I have to fix it, I hired you. So you want to be able to do all of your homework and have this research and show that client that you are knowledgeable and that you know how to solve problems. Now, when you're going into it with a client, they're going to tell you their pain points, and it's important to kind of note, don't think that you have to give them a solution right then and there. It's something that you want to listen to, talk through, ask as many questions as you can to figure out what exactly the pain point was, and then ask them if you can have a follow-up meeting either in a few days or at the end of the next sprint, and then make sure you have that meeting. Because you want to know that, you want the client to know that you're serious, that you're going to have the meeting, that you're going to try and solve the issue. And there's, again, just doing things to build that trust with the client. Knowing that your word is good. If you say you're going to have a follow-up meeting, you will. So once everybody's on board and we're going to make these changes, it's important that you make small changes. You're starting a project and you're saying after 2 sprints, this just isn't working. Everything's getting stuck in this one status, and flipping things around, it's going to create chaos. The developers won't be happy, you won't be happy, and the client won't be happy. So finding small areas to make changes that have the largest impacts are going to be the biggest gains you'll see. And the example of that is that first proof status. So it was a small change that we were able to add to the process that didn't affect everybody else. If they didn't need that first proof status, they could still go through that process without even having to look at it. But it helped provide that clarity where we needed to. So just kind of keep that in mind of small changes first, build that trust, and then after, maybe midway through the project, if you're really finding something and you really want to make a large change, that client should by then be more comfortable with hearing you out about why you want to make it and the possibility of it. Okay, now I want to move into keeping your developers happy. Because that's so important on a project, is having them happy. This is Lullabot on one of our retreats. And so the way I like to make developers happy is to let them focus on their work. Let them avoid meetings that they don't need to be in. That doesn't mean that they can't go to them. I like to make them aware of the meetings because they sometimes will find them very useful, but I like to make sure that they can focus on it. It's also very important not to bug the crap out of them. I've had developers who have complained who they're working with a client's project manager and they're just getting pinged every 10 minutes. Hey, this done? Hey, what about now? And it reminds me, I have 3 kids, and it reminds me of, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Nobody wants to hear that. And so a developer doesn't want to hear that because it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to get your focus back onto a solution that you're trying. So if I'm bugging you every 10 minutes, you're not able to get back into that flow and get into that rhythm and actually complete your work. The other thing is to be their shit umbrella. What they call that. So protect your developers from all of the politics that can go on at a client, all of just everything that they don't need to hear. It puts more stress on them when, why does it matter? They don't need to hear about that. But it's just, it's about protecting their time and respecting their time and letting them know that you do respect them and their time and that you're going to make them aware of things that they need to be made aware of, but that you've got it. You don't have to have them everywhere. And this, again, is where my Scrum notes come into play, because if I have good Scrum notes, my developers can focus on their work. I can answer the questions from the client because I've already talked to my developers about it. If I have a meeting where I'm a little worried that I might need a developer, I'll let them know, hey, at this time I have a meeting. I might add them on the invite just so they have it, and then ask, can you be available on Slack? If I'm really worried, be available on Slack, and I might pull you in. But for the most part, it's just kind of letting them do their thing. The other thing as a project manager to help developers is you have to be very detail-oriented. You've got to have the overall picture of the project in your mind, and then you need to know all of the small moving pieces as well. I want to know everything that's in my backlog, and then I want to know what I'm working on and then what's been completed. And that almost sounds obvious as I'm saying it, but it's just important because this helps me identify duplicate tickets that come in. If I already know, hey, I already have this ticket, or that feature isn't completed yet, it's not really a bug, don't worry about it. And it helps me answer questions again from the stakeholders. And for me, it's all about being that go-to person so that I can be the person who everyone bugs. Leave my developers alone. I can answer your questions. And the other thing is about bug tickets. I verify all the new bug tickets that come in. It's something that I try to triage because I don't want my developers to have to spend time doing this when they could be creating or finishing up a feature. I can go through that ticket and just verify all of the acceptance criteria to duplicate it. And again, because I have all of those details in my mind, I can say that feature's not even supposed to be implemented yet. It's not a real bug. Or this design feature, that while that's nice, that's not in scope right now. So we're going to go ahead and close that ticket. So it's just something that I've done, and having a little bit of a technical background, I can do that. It helps, and it helps developers. The other thing, as a project manager, you have to be prepared. So before Scrum every morning, I go through all of my tickets, and I see, okay, do I have questions on any of these specific tickets? Do I have questions for a developer? Do I have any emails that are outstanding that I need to ask people on? And then I make my list of questions before I get into Scrum, because it's all about using that time wisely and getting what you need out of Scrum. And then just going through it real quick, that can be developer gives their update. If I need more, I can say, hey, let's do an after talk, or I can just do a quick question, and I've got it all answered. Everybody's on the same page. It's again one of those kind of obvious things, but so many people aren't. So many people just come in and either they don't take those Scrum notes, which just breaks my heart every time that I see a project manager not do that, or they're just they show up and they're like, what's up, guys? As a project manager, you are leading that project, and you've got to keep everything together. And the last thing is to have fun. So at Lullabot, like I mentioned, we're a distributed company, so we don't have all of those little interactions in the office. And so it's one of my goals in life is to have those fun moments, because it just makes things so much more enjoyable. I've got a bear hat on down here, guys. This is Scrum. I'm trying to lead Scrum with this gigantic bear hat, which is just a silly, funny thing. Then we've got somebody wearing a dog mask and people showing their pets, which was awesome. Somebody happened to have a pet chicken, but it worked. But for me, again, it's coming early to meetings and talking to my team members, showing them that I care about them as a person and that I respect their time is so crucial. And if I come to meetings and I have those conversations with them, oftentimes it's have me identify, hey, this person's having a rough time outside of work. Maybe I should go easy on them during the sprint, instead of going, why is this guy not finishing his work right now? It's come on. It's just one of those things that have that personal connection and build trust with people. That is it. Does anybody have any questions about processes or project management, or even working with the distributed team?
So one criticism or potential pitfall I've heard people talk about with Scrum before is the effect it can have on the team in terms of constantly having to struggle to stay within the sprint commitment. If you're working on a sprint cycle, it basically feels like you're always stressed to meet the commitment of the previous of that 2-week sprint or whatever. How do you guys deal with that? What do you do if you find, as the project manager, you find yourself nearing the end of a sprint and you realize you're not gonna, it doesn't look like you're going to get a story done that you said you were going to get done. Does that become crunch time to get that story done, or are you constantly moving stuff out of scope for the sprint? Or
yeah, the second, the latter.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one, and that's why I'm trying to keep that open communication with the client and telling them these tickets aren't going to get done, because it depends on the client. But one of my clients was even asking me 2 days into a sprint, so are all the tickets going to get done? 2 days in, I don't know. But having that where I'm always identifying, I know you're telling me you're going to get this done, but I don't think so. So yeah, having that ability to move tickets out is crucial, because as painful as it is, because you want to do everything that you've committed to, Yeah, I have to have that kind of flexibility to move things out. Unless it is like, hey, we're launching this week, this feature has to go, then yeah, absolutely, it's crunch time. Like, I'm sorry, we committed to it.
But it's not crunch time just to meet any random sprint commitment.
Right, exactly.
Well, how do you set that expectation for your client? Or how do you talk to them about
Yeah.
things might not get done?
Absolutely. So then that's where I like to do those weekly status emails or on the Scrum of Scrums. And it's just what I found is because I have that daily communication with them and I'm telling them as early as I know, hey, this is kind of at risk. And then we kind of look at what's in the sprint. And if they're seeing that the developer's currently working on this other task, but they're telling me the task that I say is at risk is more important, then we might go ahead and pull them off and say, get this one done. So it's kind of that negotiation with the client.
What about up front, like at the beginning of a project? When you're initiating a project with a customer, is there anything that you do to kind of let them know that that's going to be the process?
It's during that beginning phase where we go on site with the client, talk about the scope and everything. We walk through the process and we tell them, this is how we're hoping the process works. What we're going to do is we're going to do a sprint planning where we're going to pull all the things in, and then we're going to do the story points on each ticket. And as we go, we're going to get a better idea of our velocity, and just having them know that the first few sprints, I'm not going to accurately quote my velocity. It's going to be ever changing until you kind of get into this rhythm, and I can say, okay, I'm always kind of completing this amount. But even with that, there's going to be tickets that you get into that are way more complex than what you estimated. And so it's just, you are going to deal with the people who are angry and they're like, but you said you were going to complete this. And it's just kind of trying to be that people person and trying to kind of finesse your way and negotiate. Be like, I'm on your side. I know this is really frustrating. What can we do? Like, what do we want to switch out? And just letting them know you can only do what you can do, basically.
So as a project manager, do you also manage the budget on each one of your projects? Like in agencies, I feel like that's all we care about. It's like, where are we at the budget? Where are we at the budget? And so like if you're, like one of the things that we always seem to struggle with is like, say we're going to implement something on a client's website and it's like, oh my God, this fee they were supposed to implement is like way harder than we anticipated.
Yeah.
Like I always like to hear from project managers, how do you handle that conversation with the client? Hey, so this thing we thought was going to take this long is actually going to take twice as long as that. How do you approach that? You've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, so when that happens, because it does, absolutely. Especially when you haven't identified the technology that you might be using.
Or if it's something new that you're not, like maybe your developers aren't really, experienced in, you're just we're flying kind of blind.
Right. So at that point, we kind of bring in our account manager, and it depends on the client, the size of the project. If this is a person who's spent a lot of money with us, or is a really valued client, we might eat the cost of it. You might have to, depending on what your SOW states. Depends on if it's a fixed bid, and I said I was going to get this done for that amount of money, then you eat it. But if it's not, and it's kind of like a time and hour commitment, then that's when I pull in my account manager and we go back to the client, we have that conversation and say, this is going to take a lot more resources, and so we're either going to extend our timeline if that allows, or we can add another body in there, another developer in there to try to see if we can get it done within a lot of time that we said we would.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, we've definitely had to go through the eating, which is not fun. Especially if you're the project manager on it. We've done that. Sometimes, if you've got a really good client, we can go back and be like, we might need a little bit more budget. So you're kind of approaching it as like where you are with the client, how much they're spending, and if it's like a reasonable request versus unreasonable.
Exactly. Yeah. If it's something that's going to double our timeline, we need to talk.
Okay.
And they're not fun conversations, but
and that's where probably the daily communication.
Right. Yeah.
Those conversations.
Exactly.
Going back to the conversation we were having earlier about timing and Jira boards and user stories, I use user stories. We have a small team, so I work with developers directly to estimate their stories for each ticket. And I am figuring out an average time that I can use because I also do QA. So I will have to, I kind of do 30%. So I'll buffer on a 30% time for that ticket to really get it through to make sure that timing will work. It's working sometimes not. Do you have a standard how do you handle that in terms of adding in QA with the scope of the ticket and its time?
The way we like to, so everyone hates estimating tickets. Everybody hates it. That's one of those things like retrospective. Nobody likes doing it. So the best way that I found to estimate tickets is honestly the t-shirt sizes, the small, medium, and large. And so there isn't, I don't know that I have a best practice other than I kind of agree with you where you're kind of padding a little bit knowing that you're going to have to do QA. I don't have a, always add this amount onto it. But it's just kind of like watching your velocity over the past few sprints to see if what you're estimating is accurate or if you're finding specific types of tickets you're having to QA more and if there's a reason why and just knowing that in the future do that to those same type of tickets.
Do you add the QA and that buffer time to the user story points of the ticket?
Yeah.
And then make it clear that the developer does not have that whole time to do that ticket and that's part of QA as well?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't say you had 2 days.
Yeah.
2 days is for the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you handle assignment of pull request reviews?
Oh, okay, yeah. So it depends on the project, but so for one of my recent projects, I had 3 front-end and 3 back-end developers, and we like to have the lead front-end or the lead back-end developer do the review of it. Otherwise, it's kind of like in our Slack channel, hey, I have a pull request, who's available to review it? Or if they know that we've got somebody who kind of specializes in what they were completing, they might ask them to do it. On another project, we had just an overall architect and tech lead, and he was the one reviewing everything. On another project, we had, at the end of our iteration, we had a release manager, which kind of did a round robin. And so the release manager was the one who was in charge of reviewing all of it. And so that, yeah, exactly. So it wasn't always on one person, but rotated.
And what is the developer who's creating the pull request responsible for providing to the reviewer in terms of context or instruction for what they should be looking for?
So
Do you have standards for that?
it's basically anything that they're going to give to the QA engineer needs to be in that pull request too. So all of that.
Testing steps,
Yep.
basically?
Yeah, exactly.
Functional testing steps?
Yep.
But the pull request reviewer, so I'm just asking because we've struggled with this on our team because we have a pull request process and the developer who's creating the pull request is responsible for defining functional test steps.
Mm-hmm.
But we've, on reflection, sometimes noticed that we're not sure that the code is always getting reviewed because the functional test steps can become kind of a, yes, I have checked these steps
Right.
and they passed.
Gotcha.
And if you see somebody say, hey, test steps passed, but you don't see any comments on the code,
Right.
you don't necessarily know that the code actually
You're
got reviewed.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I know that for our developers, they're extremely worried about the code quality. So the first thing they do is look at the code. Do I see any red flags in there? And then they'll kind of go through and make sure, okay, does this actually work and do what it's supposed to do?
That's a great point because it's 2 separate jobs.
It is, absolutely.
That's why I was asking about you. You know, sometimes I've wondered, should we not include the functional test steps in the PR? But then you don't want a PR that just says, here's a PR, please let me know what you think.
Right, exactly.
Because that's not helpful for
Yeah, because
anyone.
you're like, the code looks pretty,
Yeah.
but does it do what you need it to
Exactly.
do? Yeah.
Jessica, I just want to say awesome presentation. Thanks so much for sharing your workflows. I've got 2 separate questions to ask.
Okay.
First, you mentioned about the additions of the states, like the current versus future.
Uh-huh.
So can you talk to a little bit about that versus like how you handle releases? Is work that's being released, what's that process and how do you handle the future, current, new transitions?
Yeah, so for the one that we had that was the new, current, and future, so those tickets are ones that aren't 100% ready for sprints yet. So the future are like the ideas that I have, like this would be so great if I completely reorganize this room. But I don't really want to do that right now. But it's something that I'm like, okay, I might do it in the future. And then current is, hey, let's move all the chairs to that side. I know I want to do that this sprint. And so the way we were organizing those is only the ones that are in the current status are ones that I'm going to consider for my next sprint. And so then the way I'm organizing it is I'm going to have, I usually have 3 or 4 different sprints set up that I can start pulling tickets into.
From the future?
Or from the current.
Okay.
I don't-
So how do they make it from future to current? Like, is that
That's
a
when,
separate process?
Yeah, so with the client, we have our roadmap of what the features that they want to implement. And so basically we're matching up the tickets in current with their roadmap, unless they've had some kind of prioritization meeting that they're like, hey, this is now it's hot, I need to pull it in. But generally, yeah, it's that roadmap they have of features.
Okay. The other question I had was around UAT. Can you walk me through that process? How do you know who's doing what when? How do they know? Are you using separate boards?
Yep.
How's that work?
So for UAT, that's another one I like to do before I hand it off to the client, just because I'm one of those people who like to know that the work is what we said it was going to be. So I do it first. I run through it. All looks good. On the last 2 projects I've had, it's always been just the one stakeholder who's done it. And so it's the same thing where I'm keeping it assigned to the original developer, but they look in that column. And so they have 3 days before the end of the sprint, we know it's UAT time, and so we let them know, okay guys, all of these tickets are ready for UAT, so we'll send out an email and list out the tickets. And just kind of give them that list so that they can check it off. And then on another one, the customer forum one that I was talking about, we did go ahead and reassign it to the stakeholder because we had 2 different ones. But it was the same process of 3 days before, everyone was aware it was UAT time, and that we send out the list of here's who it's assigned to, you've got 24 hours to UAT this. If it doesn't get UAT in 24 hours, yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, do you happen to know anyone who is using Workfront to manage Agile projects as opposed to Jira, one of the more popular tools?
No.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, our company has acquired a license for it. And
Okay.
some of the other teams are using it for traditional project management, like developing creative, media and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It has features for Agile, but I didn't know if they were widely used. It sounds like maybe not.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.